So after they enter the land, they start sinning and sinning and sinning, and they are taken out from their land to Babylon, which made a lot of bad things happen. Basically, they adopted a bunch of fake knowledge or things from Babylon, which until this day they follow, and I mean the Jewish people. Then from there, Yahweh, when the when Cyrus came, he conquered Babylon and allowed the Yahudim to build the temple. That represents when the second coming happens. He's going to conquer the spiritual Babylon, the whore of Babylon, and will build the New Jerusalem, or will bring the New Jerusalem to earth. So all of that is being presented there. But then came the Greek Empire. After the Persians came the Greeks. And the Greeks started adding a bunch of other stuff, false doctrines, to the Israelim. Actually, to the world. The Israelim were the last ones to be changed through these doctrines, but even them were convinced or converted to this false doctrine from Greece, which is represented nowadays through false religion like Christianity. That's why Christianity and a bunch of other words and most of the things in Christianity come from the Greece religion, from the Greek religion. From, for instance, the emperor of Greece was the one who sacrificed a pig in the temple of Yahweh, and that was called the abomination of desolation, to be a representation of the false Messiah that would come at the end, placed at top of the world by the beast, the world leader of the new world order. All of that we see in the book of Maccabees is what is about to happen and what was prophesied in the book of Daniel. So in that time, that emperor, he decided to put some laws into action, and he forbade the Yahudim to read scriptures, so they had to throw away the Torah. They couldn't circumcise their children. They couldn't keep the Shabbat. And they couldn't call on the name of the Most High. So it was prohibited for them to call on the name of the Most High. After the Maccabees took power back, obviously by the mercy of Yahweh, when they took power from Antiochus Epiphanes, they, well, from what he had done, I repeat, by making the temple impure, making sacrifices of pigs for Zeus, Satan. Also, it is part of the Greek religion that comes a lot of what nowadays is Christmas. So a lot of those things, they started to make the whole world follow them and started making the Israelim do it. But other than that, I repeat, prohibit them from following the Torah, circumcising their children, keeping the Shabbat, and pronouncing the name of the Father. Even when they would make contracts and stuff like that, they could not write the name. After the Maccabees were able to take control back of the temple and dedicated it, making the feast of Hanukkah, the priests of the moment, basically like Pharisees, the scribes of the moment, decided, because as it is written, they made commandments of men, they decided that they should keep that prohibition that Antiochus have done. So they wanted to keep keeping the Shabbat as they think they should keep it. They kept circumcising children as they think that it should be done. They kept reading the Torah and interpreting it as they think it should be interpreted. But the fourth prohibition that came from the Greek emperor, they decided to keep, which was not to use the name of the Father Almighty. According to them, it was to avoid falling into sin. So they would think basically like, we don't know what the people will do, and you know how the people are. They may not understand scriptures as we do. They would think, right? So why don't we forbid them to use the name so that they don't break the third commandment, which says not to use the name for falsehood, vanity, or not to turn the name into a falsehood, illusion, which is what they actually ended up doing by taking it from the people. Because the Almighty gave us free will, and the priests were trying to take that free will, not understanding that by taking that free will, they were actually only leaving people with the option of evil, of sinning. Because Yahweh tells us that if we turn to Him and call on His name, He will turn to us. But if we turn to Him and call on Satan's name, what is going to happen? So the priest prohibited the people from calling on the name about 150 years before Yahushua the Messiah came to earth. So what they did is that the scribes, when they would make copies of the Torah, when they would make copies of the Tanakh, the scriptures, what they call the Old Testament, they would add vowel points. That's basically around the time when they started making the vowel points. Because in Hebrew, the real Hebrew, there are no vowel points. That was something that was added later and was used to change scripture. One of those changes was the name. Like I said, when they would see the name Yahweh, they would add the vowel points of the title Adonai or the title Elohim, depending where the name Yahweh would appear. So if the scripture would say Yahweh Elohim, they would add the vowels of Adonai. So that means the A, the O, and the A. So the priest would be reading the scripture, and when he would see that, he would understand that he was not supposed to pronounce Yahweh. He was supposed to pronounce Adonai. So even though Yahweh inspired the prophets to write Yahweh Elohim, the priest decided to read Adonai Elohim. So they started to change scripture, which is what the Almighty tells us not to do. And that if you take words out of the scripture, your name will be taken out of the book of life. So they themselves took the name of the Father, Creator, who wrote the scripture, out of His book. The priests and scribes took out the name of the author from the book that he wrote. So, like I said, the name Yahweh, when it was said Yahweh Elohim, they changed it to put the AOA of Adonai so that the person would read Adonai Elohim. Then when the scripture would say Adonai Yahweh, they would put the vowel points in the name Yahweh of Elohim, the E, the O, and the I. So the priest would read Adonai Elohim when he would say Adonai Yahweh. So they made those changes. They knew how to read those scriptures. However, in time, the people forgot the name. It was prohibited. They were not even supposed to know it. First, they were not supposed to say it. With time, they forgot it, and they didn't know it at all. So that's why the Messiah, as we will see next week, came to teach the name of the Father and leave His own name for us to pray to the Father through His name, which is very important to understand. But like I was saying, they forgot the name. That's why when Messiah came, they did not know the name. They were prohibited from using the name. So Messiah himself had to teach the name. eventually, since we are speaking about the name of the Father, when the nations of the world who spoke different languages like English and Spanish decided that they wanted to read scriptures, they got translators who did not know anything about the spiritual world, who did not know anything about the Father or the scripture. They only knew things about the language. They knew things about translating. They got them to make the work of translating the scriptures to our languages. And when they did that, when they saw the letters Yahweh with the vowel points of Elohim, for instance, E-O-I, they would translate Yehovah instead of Yahweh. They would get those as consonants and add the vowels of E-O-I of Elohim, and they would say, here it says Adonai Yehovah. Then, where it said Yahweh Elohim, but they put the the A-O-I of Adonai, they would say Yahovah Elohim. That's how they translated it, because they did not understand what the scribes had done with the vowel points to change the name. The reasons why they did it were different than the reasons why the translator added different names to the scriptures. So this happened through centuries, through people that did not know each other and who most of the time did not know what they were doing, meaning they were not doing it on purpose, but they were just hired for a job. They did the job even though they were not experts in scripture, experts in spiritual world. They were experts in translating. My point here is that even though those people didn't know each other, didn't plan it, it was Satan who was using their ignorance in the centuries and many other factors so that he would replace Satan, the name of the Father in the scripture that the Almighty inspired, with his own name, and that way he would take his place, because Isaiah 14 said that Satan said, I will be like the Most High. So Satan did it through those people, most of which did not even know what they were doing. Some most likely did, like the scribes, for instance. When they had these translations and they saw Yahovah, they said, well, there are two versions of the name. Let's make one, because there's only one name. So let's make one out of these two. And they kept the E of Elohim as the second vowel. They kept the O for both Ado and Elo. Adonai and Elohim both have an O. And then at the end, they kept the A of Adonai instead of the I of Elohim. And that's how they came out with the name Yehovah, or as people know it nowadays, Jehovah. So, with the letters of Yahweh, with the vowels of Adonai and Elohim, E-O-A, they ended up with Jehovah. In English, for instance, they use Jehovah. They use, as we know, the letter J in Spanish is pronounced different. There is no J in Hebrew. So, the name basically there was Yehovah, as they were calling it. Then, in the 17th century, the I in the first, the I that was in the beginning of words turned into a J, and it got a different pronunciation. And that's when Jehovah and Jesus, those pronunciations came to be. So those two names are perversions. Perversions because they are perverted versions of the real one. They don't even sound alike. And as we know, a name is not translated. Or at least you should know. Because, for instance, if you travel, if you have a passport, you have a passport because in the other countries where you go, no matter what language they speak, they have to see your real name make sure your identity is the one that is in the passport, the name that is written there. You cannot show up in another country and make up a different name. You cannot make up a different pronunciation, because it is the name that you've had since you were born. How come people know Hitler by that name? How come they know, everybody in the world knows Trump, and they knew Obama, and they know a bunch of other people's names just because they are celebrities or whatever, and they know their names in China, in Israel, and United States, and Costa Rica. Different countries with different languages all call these people the same name. How come when it comes to the Father, everybody decides to change it and claim that it is their version of it, when nowhere in the scripture the Almighty tells us, and you can make your own version, or this is my name forever, but you can call me whatever? He doesn't say that. So we need to understand the importance of the name. What is the reason behind the fact that the translations that we get from the system are perverted and have the wrong names in it, so that we can see the hand of the enemy in it, and also the hand of Yahweh taking the hand of the enemy out, bringing revelation to us and leading us to him, so that we may know him better, more intimately, closer. So I'm going to finish with this, and then we're going to start next week with the name of the Messiah. Like I said, the name, the Masoretes, the scribes, 150 years before Messiah, put vowel points to the name of the Father to change the way the priest would read scripture. But then the translators, centuries later, did not know that, and they just translated the consonants of the name Yahweh with the vowel points, and they came up with the name Jehovah. But then in the 17th century came the letter J, and it became Jehovah. I repeat, that means that the name Jehovah in Jesus did not exist until the 17th century. So it makes no sense to believe that the Messiah, who came 2,000 years or 17 centuries previous to that, was being called a name that didn't exist then. So I know there are more things that I could say. Like I said, there's so much. There are more than 450 verses that show the importance of the name in scriptures. I would like to read them all, but we will be here forever. I have already written a book, but I am editing it, and it is going to be great. And I use all those 450 verses, or at least most of them, to explain the importance of the name and many other prophecies.